The day my boss offered me $250,000 to marry her for 1 year, I was eating a vending machine granola bar in the parking garage and trying to decide whether quitting my job would count as personal growth or financial suicide. I had no idea that by the next morning I'd be standing in a courthouse beside the most terrifying woman I'd ever worked for, wearing my only good suit, while she slid a plain silver ring onto my finger and looked at me like this was just another difficult meeting she intended to win. My name is Logan Price. I was 35, single, and a senior project manager at Cross E. Vale, a private real estate development firm in Minneapolis. It was not glamorous work. Mostly budgets, contractor calls, delayed permits, angry investors, and spreadsheets that made people lie about how much they loved urban revitalization. My boss was Evelyn Cross. Strict is too soft a word for Evelyn. Evelyn didn't walk into meetings. She arrived like a verdict. Dark suits, calm voice, no wasted words, eyes sharp enough to make senior executives forget their own talking points. She never yelled. She didn't need to. She could destroy a bad proposal by saying, "Help me understand why you thought this was finished," and somehow make the whole room colder. People feared her. I did too, but I also respected her, which was inconvenient. Because Evelyn was not cruel. She was demanding. There's a difference. She protected good employees, fired lazy vendors, paid contractors on time, and had a special hatred for men who used confidence to hide incompetence. If she pushed hard, it was usually because she had already pushed herself harder. Still, nothing about our working relationship suggested she would one day corner me in a parking garage and say, "Mr. Price, I need you to marry me." That sentence came at 7:15 on a Tuesday evening. I was leaning against my truck, tie loosened, granola bar half gone, after a 12-hour day on the West Bridge renovation project. Evelyn appeared from the elevator in a black coat, carrying a leather folder and looking far too composed for the sentence she was about to say. "Do you have 5 minutes?" she asked. "With you, that usually means 40. Her mouth almost moved. Almost. "5," she said. That was already strange. Evelyn never negotiated time. She assigned it. I straightened. "Is this about Westbridge?" "In part." "What part?" "The part where you refused to alter the safety report even after Mr. Harlan implied it would be better for everyone if you did." I stared at her. "He told you that?" "He told me enough to make himself look careless and you look honest." I didn't know what to say to that. Harlan was one of our board members. Wealthy, polished, allergic to consequences. He had wanted a damaged building cleared for a fast investor walkthrough. I said no. He smiled like I was adorable, then suggested my future at Crossval might become more flexible if I learned how to be practical. I told him practical was exactly why I wasn't letting executives tour a building with a compromised stairwell. Apparently, that had traveled. Evelyn held out the folder. I didn't take it. "What is this?" "A proposal. No offense, but you don't usually bring proposals to parking garages." I needed privacy. That made the air change. I looked around. Empty concrete rows. Fluorescent lights. My truck. Her town car idling near the exit. Then she said it. "I need a husband for 1 year." I stared at her. There are moments when language fails, not because you lack words, but because every available word seems too small for the level of insanity being offered. "I'm sorry," I said. "What?" "I need to be legally married for 12 continuous months by Friday, or I lose voting control of the Cross Family Trust." I looked at her face. No joke. No embarrassment. No sign that she understood how close I was to calling security on behalf of reality. She opened the folder herself. "My grandmother created the trust. 41% voting control of Cross to Vale sits inside it. If I remain unmarried past my 38th birthday, the voting rights transfer temporarily to my uncle, Martin Cross, for a 1-year review period. And your birthday is Friday? Yes. Convenient. Catastrophic, actually. That was Evelyn. Even in disaster. Precise. I folded my arms. Why does your grandmother care if you're married? She didn't care about romance. She cared about isolation. She believed anyone running a family company needed at least one person close enough to tell them the truth without being on payroll. I looked down at the folder, then back at her. That is either weirdly wise or deeply manipulative. Both. At least you know. I've had years to be angry about it. She said it flatly, but something tired moved under the words. That was the first crack. Small, but real. What happens if your uncle gets control? I asked. He breaks the company apart, sells off the affordable housing portfolio first, then the historic properties, then anything my grandmother considered morally important and financially inefficient. That part got my attention. Westbridge was part of that portfolio. So were 6 other buildings I'd spent 2 years helping stabilize. Old apartments, senior housing, mixed-use projects in neighborhoods most investors ignored unless they could rename them. So marry someone from your world, I said. A lawyer, a board member, a man with cufflinks and no visible soul. I tried the lawyer version once, she said. There was no emotion in her voice, which meant there was probably too much beneath it. It ended badly? I asked. It ended instructively. She looked at the folder again. I am offering you $250,000, full legal protection, a prenup that gives you no liability for my assets, independent counsel of your choice, and a written termination date 12 months from the wedding. Wedding, I repeated. Civil ceremony. That does not make it less insane. No. And why me? She didn't answer fast. That mattered. Then she said, because Martin already tried to pressure you, and you didn't bend. Because you have no ties to my family. Because you are competent, private, and irritatingly difficult to impress. I almost laughed. That's your sales pitch? I'm not trying to flatter you, clearly. I'm trying to choose someone who won't sell me out before breakfast. The parking garage went quiet. For the first time, I understood something. This wasn't romance. This wasn't impulse. This wasn't even desperation dressed as strategy. This was a woman surrounded by powerful people, and somehow still completely alone. I looked at the folder, then at Evelyn. I work for you, I said. Not if you agree. You'll be transferred out of my reporting chain before anything is signed. HR will have the paperwork tonight. You already prepared that? Yes. You really thought of everything. No, she said quietly. If I had, I wouldn't be asking a man in a parking garage to become my husband. That was the second crack. And this time, I saw how scared she was underneath the control. Not shaking. Not begging. Nothing obvious. Just a woman with no safe option left. Standing perfectly straight, because falling apart would give the wrong people an opening. I took the folder, not because I was saying yes, because suddenly I could not make myself walk away without at least reading the terms. Evelyn watched me, unreadable again. Then she said, "There's one more condition. Yours or mine?" "Mine, of course." Her eyes met mine. "For 1 year in public, this has to look real." I looked down at the contract in my hand, then back at the woman who had just bought herself a husband with legal paperwork, trust clauses, and a face that looked far too steady for someone asking to be saved. And before I could stop myself, I asked, "What happens if one of us forgets it's fake?" For the first time all night, Evelyn Cross had no answer ready. Evelyn looked at me for one long second. Then she said, "We won't." That was the kind of answer people give when they are afraid the truth might be listening. I looked down at the folder in my hand. That confident, that disciplined, those are not the same thing. "No," she said, "but they often share office space." I almost smiled. Almost. Then I remembered she had just offered me $250,000 to become her legal husband, and the situation returned to insane I spent that night reading the proposal at my kitchen table with a legal pad, cold coffee, and the growing certainty that Evelyn Cross had built the strangest, cleanest trap I'd ever seen. The contract was almost offensively fair. No access to her personal assets, no obligation to share mine, no debt liability, no joint accounts unless mutually approved, independent residence allowed, but public cohabitation recommended. 1-year term, clean exit, confidentiality, full medical and emergency decision protections drafted separately, transfer out of her reporting line before signature, and the money, $250,000. Enough to wipe out my remaining student loans, fix my mother's roof properly, and stop pretending my truck's transmission noise was personality. I still didn't sleep. The next morning, I met with my lawyer, a sharp woman named Denise who read the paperwork in silence for nearly 40 minutes, then looked up and said, "This is either the most organized bad idea I've ever seen or the least romantic prenup in Minnesota." Nah, legal advice. No, legal advice is this. The contract protects you better than I expected. She tapped the page. The question is whether you understand that clean paperwork does not make messy people clean. I did understand. That was the problem. By noon, HR had moved me under a different division head. By 3, I had an email saying my role on Westbridge remained intact, but Evelyn would no longer directly review my performance. By 6, I was back in the same parking garage with the signed paperwork in a folder of my own. Evelyn stood beside her town car, phone in hand, expression unreadable. "You're here," she said. "That seems obvious. It wasn't guaranteed." "No," I said, "it wasn't." She looked at the folder. "Your attorney approved?" "She approved the contract." She questioned my judgment. "A good attorney should." I handed her the signed agreement. She took it carefully, like it weighed more than paper. Then she said, "We can still stop." That surprised me. Maybe because I hadn't expected her to offer the exit after getting what she wanted. "Can we?" I asked. "Yes." "And if we do?" "My uncle takes control Friday. I fight him in court. He bleeds the company while we litigate." Her eyes stayed on mine, "and I lose the affordable housing portfolio first." There it was again. The part that made this more than rich people playing chess with old money. I thought about Westbridge, about Mrs. Alvarado on the 3rd floor, who had brought the crews empanadas when the heat came back on, about the senior building in Duluth that Martin Cross had once called an underperforming asset, while standing in a lobby full of people who had lived there for 20 years. I looked at Evelyn. "Then we don't stop." Her face didn't soften, but something in her eyes did. The courthouse ceremony happened Thursday morning. No flowers, no music, no family, just Evelyn, me, our lawyers, and a county clerk who had clearly seen stranger things and decided not to donate facial expressions to ours. Evelyn wore a charcoal dress and a white coat. I wore my only good navy suit. We stood side by side in a small room with bad lighting while the clerk read the standard lines in a voice that made marriage sound like renewing a vehicle registration. When she asked if we had rings, Evelyn opened a small velvet box. 2 plain silver bands. Practical, unsentimental, very her. She slid one onto my finger without looking away from my face. Her hand was steady. Mine wasn't. Not much, but enough that she noticed. Of course she noticed. When it was my turn, I took the second ring and placed it on her finger. For one brief second, her professional mask slipped, and I saw something I had no business seeing. Fear, not of me, of needing this to work. Then the clerk said, "You may kiss if you'd like." Evelyn and I both turned to look at her. The clerk shrugged. "Or not. I don't judge." Evelyn's mouth twitched. I leaned slightly closer and murmured, "For public realism?" She gave me a look that could have corrected a spreadsheet. Then, very quietly, she said, "Not here." That answer did something inconvenient to my pulse. We signed. Just like that, Evelyn Cross became my wife. At least on paper. The first test came 7 hours later at her family's private board dinner. The room was all dark wood, expensive wine, and people who smiled like knives. Martin Cross sat at the far end of the table, silver-haired and handsome, in a way that probably worked on donors and terrified assistants. He looked at my ring first, then my face. "So," he said, voice smooth, "this is the husband." I smiled. "Depends who's asking." Evelyn's hand moved under the table and pressed lightly against my knee. Warning or approval? Hard to tell. Martin smiled back. Logan Price, project manager, divorced parents, state school, no family money. Interesting choice. I felt the table listening. Evelyn's jaw tightened, but I answered before she could. "Thank you." Martin blinked once. "That wasn't a compliment." "I know," I said. "I chose to improve it." Somewhere down the table, someone coughed into a napkin. Evelyn did not smile, but her hand stayed on my knee for 1 second too long before she pulled it away. Martin studied me like he had found an unexpected crack in a wall he planned to tear down. Then he leaned back. "Well, I hope you understand what you've married into." I looked at Evelyn. She was sitting perfectly straight, eyes forward, ring catching the candlelight, surrounded by family who treated her control like a temporary inconvenience. Then I looked back at Martin. "I'm starting to," I said, and for the first time since this fake marriage began, I realized the hardest part would not be pretending to be Evelyn's husband. It would be remembering I was allowed to stop. The dinner lasted 2 hours. It felt like 8. Martin spent most of it smiling at me like he was waiting for the cheap suit to admit it didn't belong in the room. The rest of the family watched Evelyn with that careful hunger wealthy people develop when they've been told power might be available soon. Evelyn never gave them anything. Not a flinch. Not a crack. Not one nervous glance in my direction. She answered questions about the trust, the board, the transition filing, and the legal confirmation of our marriage like she was walking everyone through a quarterly report. Calm, clean, unshakable. But under the table, when Martin said, "I'm sure Mr. Price understands temporary arrangements can become expensive if handled poorly," her hand found mine. Not romantic. Not at first. Just a brief warning. Or maybe a request. I turned my palm up and held hers. That was the first time I felt Evelyn Cross hesitate. Only for a second. Then her fingers closed around mine. Martin saw it. I wanted him to. He leaned back, eyes moving between us. "How long have you two been involved?" Evelyn answered smoothly. "Long enough." "That isn't an answer. It's the only one you're entitled to." I nearly laughed into my water. Martin's smile sharpened. "Forgive me. It's only that nobody in this family knew anything about it until yesterday." I looked at him. Maybe that says more about the family than the marriage. The table went still. Evelyn's fingers tightened once around mine. This time, definitely approval. Martin looked at me like he had finally decided I was not furniture. Good. By the time we left, the snow had started outside, light and sharp under the restaurant lights. Evelyn's driver waited at the curb, but she didn't move toward the car immediately. Instead, she stood beside me under the awning, looking out at the street. "Didn't say thank you. You implied it with your hand." Her head turned toward me. That should have embarrassed me. It didn't. Because somewhere between the courthouse and that dinner table, the fake part of the marriage had begun to feel less like a lie and more like a room we were both standing in, without knowing who would open the door first. She looked away first. "Martin will dig into you now." "He already did." "No," she said. "That was research. Now it becomes pressure. Let him." "Logan, I know what I signed." She laughed once, soft and humorless. "No, you know what the contract says. That's not the same thing." The car door opened. We got in without another word. The public cohabitation part started that night. Evelyn's house was not a home so much as a beautiful structure where silence had learned to behave. Glass, stone, warm wood, expensive furniture nobody seemed to sit on. Everything was tasteful. Everything was perfect. Everything looked like it had been approved by a committee that disliked fingerprints. She showed me the guest suite like a hotel manager explaining amenities. You'll have privacy here. For the next few weeks, our fake marriage became a performance with strangely real details. We arrived together at board events, left together from dinners, took carefully ordinary photos for the company newsletter when PR decided leadership stability needed visual evidence. I learned which smile Evelyn used when she hated someone. She learned I drank coffee too late, and then pretended insomnia was a coincidence. The public part was easy. The private part was dangerous. Because Evelyn was different at home. Not softer exactly. Less edited. She wore glasses when she read contracts. Burned toast because she answered emails while making breakfast. Fell asleep on the living room couch with her laptop still open and one hand curled under her cheek like she had simply run out of command. The first time I covered her with a blanket, she woke up just enough to whisper, "Don't be kind if you don't mean it." That sentence told me more than any family history could. So I answered, "I don't fake that part." Her eyes opened then. For a moment, she looked at me like she wanted to believe it and hated that she did. Then she closed them again. Martin's first move came the following Monday. He sent me an email through an attorney offering a discreet settlement if I admitted the marriage had been financially motivated and agreed to an annulment after a statement. The number was double what Evelyn had offered me. I forwarded it to her with one line. "Your uncle thinks I'm more expensive than I am." She found me in the kitchen 10 minutes later. I was making eggs badly. She was holding her phone, barefoot, hair loose, wearing one of those silk robes rich people apparently owned without irony. "You didn't even consider it?" she asked. "No? That's a lot of money. It came from him? That's your reason? It's enough." She set the phone down slowly. Something in her face moved, and for once she didn't hide it fast enough. "You have no idea how rare that is in my life," she said. The pan hissed behind me. I turned off the stove before breakfast became evidence of emotional incompetence. Evelyn stepped closer. Not much. But in that kitchen, with snow against the windows and Martin's bribe still glowing on her phone, it felt like the distance between us had become the only thing either of us could still control. "Logan," she said quietly. "Yeah? If I ask you something, I need you not to make it easier than it is." That sounded like Evelyn, precise even when terrified. "Okay." She looked down at the ring on her finger, then back at me. When the year is over, her voice stayed steady but barely. "Are you already counting the days until you can leave?" I should have answered immediately. A good fake husband would have. A decent man might have softened it. But she had asked for the hard version, so I gave it to her. "No," I said, "that's the problem." Her breath caught once. Just once. Then the security panel by the front door chimed. Evelyn turned toward the hallway. On the screen, Martin Cross stood at the gate with 2 attorneys, a camera crew behind him, and a smile that told me he had brought the war straight to her front door. Martin came to the gate like a man who had mistaken surprise for strategy. Evelyn stared at the security screen, completely still. 2 attorneys stood behind him. 1 camera crew. 1 woman holding a microphone with the logo of a local business channel. It was not a mob, but it was designed to feel like one. I looked at Evelyn. Does he own them? Probably not. Her voice was flat. But he knows how to feed them. Chimed again. Martin looked straight into the camera and smiled. "Evelyn," he said through the intercom, I think it's time we stop hiding from the truth. Her face did not change, but I saw her hand curl once at her side. That was the thing about Evelyn. She didn't break loudly. She turned pressure into stillness, and people mistook that for not feeling anything. I stepped closer. What truth does he think he has? That I paid you? You did. That the marriage began as a contract? It did. That it's fake? I looked at her then. No, I said, that part is outdated. Her eyes moved to mine. For 1 second, the gate, the cameras, the attorneys, all of it fell away. Then I picked up my jacket from the chair. Let him in. Logan, if we keep him outside, he gets a better picture. I nodded toward the screen. If we bring him into the house, he has to speak plainly. Evelyn looked at me for 1 long second. Then she pressed the gate release. Martin entered like he had already won. He walked into Evelyn's foyer with the camera crew behind him, wearing a dark coat and the same smooth smile from the board dinner. Evelyn, he said, I'm sorry it had to come to this. No, you're not, she said. That almost made me smile. Martin's eyes moved to me. Mr. Price. Still here? It's my address too, according to the mail Evelyn keeps putting on the wrong counter. The microphone woman looked between us, interested. Good. Let her notice we sounded like people who had actually lived in the same house. Martin opened a folder. I have documentation showing this marriage was based on a financial agreement. Evelyn's face hardened. You have stolen legal documents. I have a source. You have a felony with formatting. One of his attorneys shifted. Martin ignored it and looked toward the camera. The public deserves to know whether Crossview Vale is being protected by legitimate leadership or by a fraudulent marriage purchased to manipulate a trust. There it was. The trap. If Evelyn denied the contract, he'd produce it. If she admitted it, he'd frame her as corrupt. If I stayed quiet, I became the bought man in the background. So I spoke. The marriage started as an agreement. The room went silent. Evelyn turned toward me sharply. Martin's smile widened. I kept going. I was offered money. I accepted legal protection. I agreed to a 1-year term. I looked directly at the camera now. And none of that changes why I'm still standing here. Martin's smile faded slightly. Good. I stepped forward. Your mistake, I said to him, is that you think the ugliest part of a beginning is the whole story. It isn't. The woman with the microphone had stopped looking at Martin. Now she was looking at me. I turned toward Evelyn. She asked me because I was independent. Because you couldn't buy me. Because you had already tried. I looked back at him. And you proved her right when you offered me twice as much to walk away. Martin's jaw tightened. One of his attorneys whispered, Martin. Too late. Evelyn's eyes had gone very still. You offered him money? She asked. I pulled up the email on my phone and handed it to her. She read it. Then she looked at Martin, and for the first time since I'd known her, Evelyn Cross did not look controlled. She looked free of the need to be. You came into my home, she said quietly, with cameras, accusing me of buying loyalty while holding proof that you tried to buy it yourself. Martin's face changed. Not fear. Calculation. But the room had shifted, and everyone knew it. Evelyn turned to the camera crew. You may record this. Then she faced Martin. You will leave my property. Your attempted bribe will go to the board, the trust attorneys, and the ethics committee before noon. If you release stolen documents, my counsel will respond publicly with the full chain, including your offer. Her voice stayed calm, but this time calm sounded like a door locking. You wanted transparency. You'll have it. Martin looked at me with pure hatred. You think she chose you? He said. She needed a signature. I should have let it go. I didn't. She needed a signature for 12 months, I said. I'm the one deciding to stay after. Evelyn went completely still beside me. Martin heard it too. So did the camera. So did I. The sentence had left my mouth before I dressed it up as strategy. Martin left 6 minutes later. No exit speech. No victory smile. Just a man discovering that bringing cameras to a house does not guarantee you control what they see. When the door closed, the silence felt enormous. Evelyn stood in the foyer, email still open on my phone, ring on her hand, eyes fixed somewhere near the floor. I waited. Then she said, "You said you're staying." I did. Was that for him? No. Her eyes lifted to mine, and there it was. The question that had been hiding under a year's worth of paperwork before the year had even begun. I walked closer, slowly enough that she could stop me if she wanted to. She didn't. "I don't want out," I said. "Not when the trust is safe. Not when the contract expires. Not when Martin loses his last excuse. I don't know when the fake part ended, Evelyn, but I know it did." Her lips parted slightly, and for once, no answer came ready. Then she laughed, one quiet, disbelieving breath. "I paid you to become my husband," she whispered. "You also transferred me out of your reporting chain, protected my legal interests, and made terrible toast for 3 months." Her eyes softened. That toast was not terrible. It was structural damage. A real smile touched her face. Small, unprotected. Then she stepped forward and rested her forehead against my chest like she was too tired to keep holding herself upright, alone. I held her. That was all. No grand performance. No audience. No contract language. Just Evelyn, finally letting someone stay. The first year did not become easy. Martin was removed from 2 committees after the bribe review. The stolen document leak never landed the way he wanted, because Evelyn released the truth first. The affordable housing portfolio stayed intact. Westbridge reopened with residents moving back in before Christmas, and Mrs. Alvarado cried when the elevator worked again. Evelyn and I stayed married, at first because the trust required it. Then because mornings became strange without her correcting my coffee ratio. Because she started leaving notes on my lunch containers that said things like, "Eat before 3, you impossible man." Because I learned her silences. Because she learned mine. On the last day of the 12th month, she placed the termination folder on the kitchen table. Clean exit. As promised. I looked at it. Then at her. She was trying to look composed and failing beautifully. I picked up the folder, walked to the shredder in her office, and fed it in page by page. When I came back, she was crying. I had never seen Evelyn cry before, so I said the only thing that made sense. "Mrs. Price, your paperwork has been rejected." She laughed through it, then finally kissed me like the whole year had been one long breath she could now release. 2 years later, we had a real wedding. Small, no cameras, no board members except the few who had earned chairs. My mother cried. Evelyn pretended not to. She wore ivory. I wore the same silver ring, and when the officiant said the word husband, it finally sounded less like a legal position and more like a home. 5 years later, Crosslaw Vale still existed in one piece. Evelyn still terrified executives. I still managed projects. Martin moved to private investments, which was a polite way of saying no one trusted him with anything that had tenants, history, or human consequences. And sometimes, when someone asked how we met, Evelyn would say, "I hired him." Then I'd say, "Terrible onboarding process." And she'd look at me with that almost smile I used to think was impossible to earn. The truth was, our marriage began as the strangest contract of my life. But the real thing began the morning I realized I no longer cared when the fake part had ended. What would you have done if your strict boss offered to pay you to be her husband for 1 year, only for the fake marriage to become the most real thing in your life? And have you ever seen something that started as an arrangement turn into a choice? Tell me your story in the comments. If you like this one, leave a like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.